Superbugs are bacteria that cause drug-resistant infections. That means they're much more difficult to treat and can ultimately lead to death. They're expected to kill 10 million people a year by 2050 if they aren't stopped. But in some parts of the world, many people are already dying as doctors struggle to treat their patients with the drugs they have to hand. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism visited hospitals in Malawi to witness their struggle against superbugs. This is Lillian Machaya and her daughter, Abigail, in Blantyre's Queen Elizabeth Central Hospital in southern Malawi. Born premature, Abigail caught an infection called Klebsiella. In 2003, about 12% of Klebsiella bugs were resistant to commonly available antibiotics in Malawian hospitals. Now it's 90%, meaning Abigail's chances of survival are slim. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital is the biggest in the country, and many babies like Abigail are sent here for treatment. But infections like Klebsiella are on the rise. In 1 week, 4 babies became infected with this superbug. At the time of filming, 2 had already died. Dr. Kondwani Kawaza is a neonatologist at the hospital.
It feels sad because you have a mother who has waited for 9 months to get a baby, and then you lose that baby from a potentially treatable condition.
In Malawi, easy access to common antibiotics has led to their overuse, and now many drugs have stopped working due to bacteria evolving and becoming resistant to them. In addition, poor hygiene in some health centres is partly to blame for the rise in superbugs. For example, this is Nyambi Health Centre in Machinga district, 100 kilometres north of Blantyre. It has no running water and regularly runs out of soap and sterile gloves. Pregnant women are told to bring a plastic sheet to give birth on and a razor blade to cut the umbilical cord. If the blades aren't sterile, they risk infection. And because of the misuse of antibiotics, infections can't always be cured. But hospital workers are concerned that prescribing more expensive and less widely available drugs to treat the infections could ultimately lead to the same cycle of resistance, leaving them with no remaining options.
Yeah, some people think that the antibiotic resistance is a hypothetical threat, non-existent threat that only academics talk about. But for us working here, we do see it every day. We do see babies change suddenly from a robustly active baby to a profoundly sick baby.
Abigail died a month after she was infected with Klebsiella. If the international community fails to do more to stop the spread of superbugs, experts warn that millions more will face the same fate.
My name is Madeleine Davis. I lead the team reporting on antibiotic resistance for the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London. And I know that sounds a bit like a private detective's office, but in fact, we're a non-profit media organisation, and we write stories and make films that are in the public interest, like the one you just saw from Malawi. I thought that when I left Malawi, that Abigail, the baby that you saw in the film, was going to make it. But her body had been damaged by the drug-resistant infection, and she died. This was a real human tragedy, and there were many more stories like it from across Malawi. Jelena was just 18, and she just lost her baby when I met her. She'd had a cesarean section, and the cut became infected. Doctors gave her antibiotics, but they didn't work. The infection spread to her womb. Doctors again gave different antibiotics, but they didn't work. In order to save her life, doctors had to operate and remove her womb. She now can't have children, and she fears that she'll be ostracized. This is the reality of antibiotic resistance. I know that confusingly, antibiotic resistance goes by many different names and has many acronyms: antibiotic resistance, ABR, antimicrobial resistance, AMR, drug resistance, or my personal favorite, superbugs. But whichever name you choose, as most of you will already know, what we're talking about here are bacterial and fungal infections that have become resistant, immune to the drugs we use to treat them. Drugs that are used to save lives are now failing. That's why the World Health Organization has called AMR one of the greatest public health threats the world now faces. And it's not just happening in Malawi. My team is producing a series of stories from around the world showing how the problem is already affecting health systems. Tuberculosis, which is I know what many of you are here to talk about at tomorrow's meeting, was a mass killer in every country until antibiotics arrived. When I visited India last month, I saw just what happens when this killer disease becomes resistant to frontline drugs. I met Upsana, a 22-year-old woman who is studying for a master's degree in history in the University of Delhi. She was diagnosed with multi-drug resistant TB. She'd already watched her sister die of the disease. She now faced 2 years taking antibiotics with severe side effects. They'd already affected her sight and her hearing. She has just a 50-50 chance of surviving. No new class of antibiotic has been developed since the 1980s. The pipeline is completely dry. We take antibiotics for granted, but they really are wonder drugs. Collectively, as an international community, we've squandered them. We've prescribed them for coughs and colds. We've administered them en masse to animals to fatten them up before slaughter. And in places like Malawi and India, and all of the countries in the world, because we're all affected, we're now paying the price, because they might not work for much longer. So I think you saw in the film that best estimates show 10 million people a year could die if we don't act. That's the bad news. The good news is that we can act now. There are lots of things we can do, and that's what this event today is all about. Breaking down the problem into manageable solutions. So I'm very, very proud to be here today as the US Center for Disease Control and Prevention launches its AMR Challenge, a venture asking people like you from different countries and different specialties to make a promise, a pledge to stem the rising tide of AMR. It's my one hope that when you leave here today, it'll be with images of Lillian and Abigail in your mind, and you'll think about all the people in your own countries that are affected, and it'll inspire you to make that change. So we've got an absolutely stellar lineup of speakers ahead, but before that, I'd just like to play you another video about a father who suffered a resistant infection from methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA, or MRSA as it's known in the US. So let's take a look.
Coming up into the city of Portland after 11 hours in the saddle, got to be emotional. I just broke down. I'm doing this. I'm gonna make it.
I knew he was gonna do it, but I was overcome with a lot of emotion, realizing that just 6 months before that, he was lying down on a couch and not able to do the things for himself that he once did.
I was part of the good outcome. There are far too many that are on the opposite end and lose their battle, their fight with their antibiotic-resistant infection. My original injury came during a basketball game.
Well, he had had surgery on his ACL, and Chris actually had already started doing all the recovery process and was walking well. And so we were given permission to go on a trip.
And on our way back home from that vacation, we stopped at a water park.
Within, I would say, less than 10 hours, his leg was completely swollen, red, hot to touch.
I went to the doctor the next day. They determined that I had acquired a MRSA infection in my knee.
The doctor said that we would need to stay in the hospital and be isolated for a few days. They sent us home. His symptoms kind of resurfaced.
I felt like the rest of my body was just deteriorating. Go to the emergency room.
Put me into panic mode.
What if this doesn't go away?
They did several more surgeries on Christopher's knee.
Multiple surgeries.
Trying to get the infection under control. There was something going on outside of the surgery that we had not seen.
They didn't know where else to look for the infection.
Possibly gone to his brain. The doctor basically told me at that point that it had gone to his brain, that there wasn't a lot that they could do because he was on the highest, most potent antibiotic that they know to treat MRSA. And I faced the realization that I might lose him. And at 30 years old, I wasn't ready to be a widow or to be a single mom. They went in and removed it all, but with that, Chris lost a lot of movement in his leg. He was unable to do the easy things like go to the bathroom by himself or get food for himself.
I couldn't be the husband that I needed to be, that I wanted to be for my wife. I couldn't be who I wanted to be for my kids.
When he was really sick, my son would take his Legos and sit on his dad's bed.
I love being a dad. More than anything, and not being able to be that wrestling, running around, Lego building, tea party sipping dad that I had been. It was incredibly difficult emotionally. It was literally a moment while I was in the hospital in bed that I just...
The drug-resistant infection meant he was bedridden for 6 months. If resistance rises, this will become the new reality. People spending longer in hospital, with more expensive treatment, and with antibiotics with more severe side effects. It could hugely impact our health systems and our wider economies, and that's why we're here today, to do something about it. So it's with great, great pleasure that I'll soon be welcoming to the stage Alex Azar, who was sworn in as President Trump's Secretary of Health and Human Services in January this year. Mr. Azar has spent the majority of his career working in senior healthcare leadership roles in both the public and the private sector. He's no stranger to the Department of Health and Human Services, having served as its general counsel and its deputy secretary in the early noughties. He now, of course, leads the department. It's the largest federal government department by spending, with a budget of 1.2 trillion American dollars this year. You might be surprised to know that it not only encompasses healthcare programs, but scientific institutions like CDC, the National Institutes of Health, the Food and Drug Administration, as well as programs supporting children and families. It also carries out important work protecting Americans against natural disasters and infectious disease, where AMR, of course, is an ever-growing concern. So it's with great, great pleasure that I'm introducing you to the 24th U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to extend my personal welcome and that of the United States government to everybody who has joined us here tonight and in this fight. I know there are many events vying for your attention this important week, so we appreciate your being here. It's a testament to the importance of what we're here to discuss, antimicrobial resistance. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has made AMR a priority in both our domestic and our global work, and it's a priority for the entire U.S. government. Antibiotics have brought us so many medical and public health advances, from safe surgery and childbirth to the treatment of cancer through chemotherapy. The emergence and rapid spread of antimicrobial resistance threatens to undo this progress at an enormous human and economic cost. No one is immune from this threat. While the exact burden varies, High levels of resistance have been found across sectors and in every region of the world. Here in the United States, as we saw in the video, drug-resistant bacteria infect 2 million people every year, and more than 20,000 people die as a result. Aggressive global action is needed to slow the development of new resistance, prevent the spread of existing resistance, and spur the development of new antimicrobial products. The United States has made significant investments in research and development to combat AMR. Along with partners, we're working to improve antibiotic use and accelerate the development of new drugs, diagnostics, and vaccines, while ensuring access to these innovations worldwide. Following the 2016 high-level meeting on AMR, remarkable progress has been made in strengthening global coordination through the tripartite. The U.S. appreciates the efforts of the WHO, OIE, FAO, UNIP, and others in leading this work, and welcomes continued partnership at the global level. But we've got to go further. Toward that end, tonight I am formally launching the AMR Challenge, a year-long global call to action to accelerate progress in the fight against antimicrobial resistance. This challenge invites stakeholders across the public and private sectors and around the world to identify ways in which they can contribute to the fight against AMR both locally and globally. In 2015, the United States convened a similar challenge at the national level. 3 years on, we've seen the impact of many of those commitments, and you'll have the chance to hear about some of these achievements during tonight's showcase. Already, we have more than 100 organizations and governments who've stepped up to join this global AMR challenge, so I want to highlight a few of them now. The AMR Alliance, which represents more than 100 pharmaceutical companies, agreed earlier in 2018 on a framework that promotes responsible antibiotic manufacturing. Last week, these companies took a further step by publishing the first list of targets to guide environmental risk assessments regarding the discharge of antibiotics and their residue. We also have successful public-private investment partnerships in this space. CarbX will invest $80 million globally during the next year to support more than 40 product developers as they pursue new drug classes, new diagnostics, and new treatment alternatives and vaccines. Each award agreement will include commitments to access and stewardship to ensure proper use of these life-saving innovations. We've also seen commitments from healthcare providers. Systems that provide care at more than 20,000 healthcare facilities in the United States and abroad have committed to improving antibiotic stewardship, and hundreds have also committed to reducing infections. Professional clinical societies representing more than 250,000 providers across U.S. healthcare settings are committed to improving antibiotic stewardship among their members. Individual corporations have stepped up too. Walmart U.S. is working with its animal protein suppliers to report antibiotic use throughout its supply chain. They will also conduct blockchain projects to improve responsible antibiotic use in farm animals, impacting their 5,000-plus locations across America. Petco has committed to not allowing prophylactic use of antibiotics in its supply chain and supporting veterinary oversight for access to antibiotics in its 1,500 locations across the country. Many of those who made commitments are here tonight, so I want to personally thank you and applaud you for stepping up. Thank you for that great work. We and the rest of the world community are grateful for your leadership, and we hope you will encourage others to join in this important endeavor. If you have yet to make a commitment, I urge you to consider what kind of commitment you could make to protect people, animals, and the environment around the world from this terrible threat. Next year, at the General Assembly, I look forward to marking the end of this 12-month challenge and celebrating the progress that we have all made together. The threat of AMR is real and looming. Indeed, part of the promise of modern medicine itself is at stake. But together, with every country and sector doing its part, we can keep future generations safe. So thank you again for your commitments and for joining in this very important fight. Thank you.
Following the discovery of penicillin in 1928, antibiotics have saved millions of lives around the world, and the average life expectancy has increased considerably. But the wealth of these miracle drugs is not only a success story. The bacteria have fought back, and today we see an alarming trend. The number of multi-drug resistant bacteria has grown dramatically over the last decades, resulting in thousands of deaths due to infections that cannot be cured. What happened? The massive use of antibiotics has stimulated bacteria to develop resistance mechanisms in order to survive. For many years, we did not know enough to take this global threat seriously. And although awareness and involvement has increased, much damage has already been done. Antibiotics are often prescribed unnecessarily for infections that are likely to go away without treatment. In many countries, antibiotics are also sold over the counter without a prescription from the doctor. At the same time, in many low-income countries, lack of access to antibiotics actually causes more deaths than resistance. Multi-drug resistant bacteria spread within hospitals as a result of poor infection control, and also between people in the community. Bacteria know no boundaries, and extensive international travel and trade help resistance to spread from continent to continent. Antibiotic resistance does not only affect humans, but also the health of animals and the environment. It is all connected. The unpleasant truth is that scientists have not come up with a new class of antibiotics since 1987, and we are about to enter a new era where many commonly used antibiotics have lost their effects. Modern medicine relies on the availability of effective antibiotics. Without them, it would be too risky to perform organ transplants, cancer chemotherapy, or even common surgical procedures such as hip replacements. Care of preterm babies would also be at higher risk for untreatable infections. Resistance is costly, both for the individual and for society. By 2050, the number of deaths due to antibiotic resistance could reach 10 million per year, and thus exceed the number of people who annually die from cancer today. Antibiotic resistance has been considered as dangerous and deadly as terrorism and global warming. Are we heading towards a post-antibiotic era? We cannot reverse this frightening trend, but we can slow it down. And all of us need to change our behavior to once again gain the upper hand in the fight against antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
I think a key point raised in that video, especially in low-income countries, lack of access to antibiotics kills far more people than antibiotic resistance. And I think it's really important that we remember that. We're not trying to ration use here. What we're trying to do is make sure these drugs are used appropriately so they work for the people that need them. The video also made the point that superbugs bred in one country spread all over the world. It's a global problem, and we need global solutions. And that's why our next speaker is so important. I'll be shortly welcoming to the stage Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. Dr. Tedros was elected as World Health Organization Director General in May last year. He outlined 5 key priorities for the organization: universal health coverage, health emergencies, women, children, and adolescents' health, the health impacts of climate and environmental change, and transforming the organization. Before working for World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros served as Ethiopia's Minister of Foreign Affairs, leading efforts to negotiate the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, in which 193 countries committed to the financing necessary to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. During his stint as Ethiopia's Minister of Health, he reformed the country's health system. A decade ago, he was also elected as chair of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, which, as I'm sure you all know, revolutionized funding for these disease areas. His leadership in these areas has been immensely impactful, and I'm delighted to welcome him to the stage. Welcome.
Thank you, Madeline, for that very kind introduction. Secretary Azar, my brother, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for inviting me to speak this evening. And it's an honor to be here for the launch of the AMR Challenge. Thank you for your leadership on this issue. Let me begin with a story. Carl Rome was an assistant platoon guide with the US Army. He returned home after serving overseas, but became gradually sicker and sicker. Eventually, he was admitted to hospital and treated with several antibiotics. Nothing worked. He died of cardiac arrest because drug-resistant bacteria had destroyed his heart. I think relatively Chris's story would be better. His mother, Joyce, said this, I quote, "You are brought up to believe that if you get sick, there is an antibiotic for you, and they give it to you, and you get better. But since then, we have learned that too much is not a good thing," end of quote. The US CDC estimates that 23,000 people just like Carl die in this country every year due to drug-resistant infections. Globally, drug resistance is responsible for an estimated 700,000 deaths a year. That's 700,000 families who lose someone they love because a medicine that should have cured them didn't work. Many of those deaths are from drug-resistant tuberculosis. That's why tomorrow's high-level meeting on tuberculosis at the General Assembly is so important for turning the tide, not only on TB, but on antibiotic resistance. Earlier this year, WHO launched the first report from our global antimicrobial surveillance system, known as GLASS. The findings are alarming. In some countries, up to 82% of bacterial infections are resistant to at least one of the most commonly used antibiotics. This is a system failure, causing a human tragedy that we cannot and we should not tolerate. But this is more than just a health issue. The World Bank estimates that left unchecked, the economic impact of antimicrobial resistance will be greater than that of the global financial crisis, putting 3.8% of global GDP at risk. This is a global crisis that requires a global response. I think Madeline had already said that. Nor is it a challenge for the health sector alone. We can only address the threat of AMR with close cooperation between the food and agriculture industries to address the root causes of this problem with a One Health approach. That's why WHO is working closely with our friends at the World Organization for Animal Health, OIE, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. Just a couple of weeks ago, we met in Rome to formalize the details of a global work plan to ensure a multi-sectoral approach. Next week in Geneva, WHO will convene countries and partners to discuss the global development and stewardship framework to combat antimicrobial resistance. Our aim is to foster a global approach to developing and using antimicrobials more efficiently to safeguard them for future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier this year, WHO's member states, of which US is one, adopted our new 5-year strategic plan. At its heart are what we call the triple billion targets. 1 billion more people benefiting from universal health coverage, 1 billion more people better protected from health emergencies, and 1 billion more people enjoying better health and well-being. That makes it triple billion. Addressing the threat of AMR is relevant to all three. Achieving universal health coverage means ensuring people can access safe and effective medicines. Achieving health security means ensuring we have effective medicines for use in emergencies. And we cannot achieve better health and well-being without developing new and effective medicines. WHO has also produced several tools to support global effort to combat AMR. Last year, we published the priority pathogens list, which highlighted the 12 groups of bacteria for which investments are needed most urgently, in addition to the priority of addressing drug-resistant tuberculosis. The latest version of our essential medicines list includes practical guidelines on which antibiotics should be used to treat common infections and which should be kept in reserve for the most severe circumstances. And we also published a report last year about the state of research and development for new antimicrobials. It showed that the cupboard is disturbingly bare. The cupboard is disturbingly bare. Urgent investments in research and development are needed, but research and development alone is not the answer. We also need to take cross-sectoral action to address the root cause of the problem. For example, we can prevent infections in the first place with improved sanitation and hygiene. Ladies and gentlemen, let me leave you with 3 challenges. First, we must meet the challenge of saving lives by using antibiotics responsibly, and only when necessary. We need access without excess. Second, we must meet the challenge of investing in research and development for new medicines. And third, last one, we must meet the challenge of working across sectors to implement change with a One Health approach. The AMR challenge you're launching tonight, Secretary Azar, is a wonderful opportunity to make progress on each of these 3 recommendations I made. I congratulate the CDC and my brother, Alex Azar, and I wish you every success. And you can count on WHO support as we work together to create a healthier, safer, fairer world. Thank you so much again. Thank you.
So what we ended up building was basically a petri dish, except that it's 2 feet by 4 feet. And the way we set it up is that there are 9 bands, and at the base of each of these bands, we put a normal petri dish thick agar with different amounts of antibiotic. On the outside, there's no antibiotic. Just in from that, there's barely more than the E. coli can survive. Inside of that, there's 10 times as much, 100 times, and then finally the middle band has 1,000 times as much antibiotic. And then across the top of it, pour some thin agar that bacteria can move around in. The background is black because there's ink in it, and the bacteria appear as white. First, you see they spread in the area where there's no antibiotic up until the point they can no longer survive. Then a mutant appears on the right. It's resistant to the antibiotic. It spreads until it starts to compete with other mutants around it. When these mutants hit the next boundary, they too have to pause and develop new mutations to make it into 10 times as much antibiotic. And then you see the different mutants repeat this at 100. And after about 11 days, they finally make it into 1,000 times as much antibiotic as the wild type can survive. And so we can see by this process of accumulating successive mutations that bacteria, which are normally sensitive to an antibiotic, can evolve resistance to extremely high concentrations in a short period of time.
So as you can see, no matter how fast we are, the bacteria are faster. It's about Darwinian survival for them. And now for a perspective from India. Next, I'll be welcoming to the stage Balgram Bhargava, Director General of the Indian Council of Medical Research. The Indian Council of Medical Research is one of the largest and oldest medical research bodies in the world. Dr. Bhargava is a renowned cardiologist, having practiced medicine for more than 30 years. In India, he established the Society for Less Investigative Medicine, which seeks to combat excessive commercial medical practices, and he was awarded a prize for those efforts. He's one of the most foremost leaders in India in biomedical innovation, public health, medical education, and research. So welcome to the stage, Dr. Bhargava.
Thank you, Madeleine, for the very kind words. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I will be representing 15% of the world population, and we will be talking about the initiatives which the Indian Council of Medical Research has done on the AMR. So AMR, I think Tedros has summarized very well. The basic problem is a balance or a disbalance between access and excess. And that is what it's all about. Limited access is a problem. Too much excess is also a problem. And India has both parts of the world within India. You have excess in some parts of the country, and you have limited access in some parts of the country. Now we have MDR, tuberculosis, near smear positive, less than 3%. Malaria, chloroquine failure rate of about 35%. Sulfapyrimethamine resistance of 26%. Gonorrhea is resistant to penicillin, fluoroquinones, and now also cephalosporins. AMR is a major issue in the intensive care units, hip, knee replacements, transplants, cancer treatments, cesareans, and the prevalence of MRSA, which we just saw a film about, is 20 to 40%. It is frightening. We have for addressing AMR, we have issues of evidence, engagement, education, research, development, innovation, newer antibiotics, drug targets, drug development, anti-infectives, prescriptions, and diagnostics. So the policymakers, including myself and some of our ministers, have done a little bit, but more has to be done in terms of regulation and also in terms of medicines and antibiotics being available over the counter without prescriptions. The key initiatives and the key areas of focus are from the ICMR, or the Indian Council of Medical Research. We are generating reliable evidence, antibiotic and diagnostic stewardship, understanding mechanisms of resistance, transmission dynamics, and our key goal is the One Health integrated platform. Now, if you look at this country, 4,000 kilometers north to south and 4,000 kilometers east to west, we have a huge problem, and our antimicrobial research and surveillance network of the Indian Council of Medical Research has included 20 different institutions within the country, and the priority pathogens are Enterobacteriaceae, gram-negative non-fermenters, enteric fever, diarrhegenic organisms, MRSA, Enterococcus, and fungal pathogens. Overprescription of vancomycin, linezolid, tigecycline, leading to increasing of this AMR, and drug-resistant fungal infections are also increasing. We have given standard operating procedures in bacteriology and the procedures from the Indian Council of Medical Research for the country, and they are being disseminated. We are strengthening the antimicrobial surveillance program, and we have identified breaches in infection control. The ICMR aims CDC Strength in Healthcare is also facilitating these programs, and we have given treatment guidelines for antimicrobial use for common symptoms. And the National Action Plan has also been developed for antimicrobial resistance, with 11 ministries on board to enhance awareness, strengthen surveillance, and improve rational use of antibiotics, reduce infections, and promote research. And you can see the health minister and the other minister also there. Regulatory aspects, we have the Schedule H1, which was started in March of 14, which included 46 drugs, including 24 antimicrobial, which are not going to be available over the counter, third, fourth generation cephalosporins and carbapenems, and 11 anti-tuberculosis drugs. Banning of 354 fixed drugs combination, also containing antimicrobials, has happened in March 2014. So to end, we have to have evidence, exploration, engagement in education, to expand understanding of AMR community antibiotic use, research, strengthen AMSP, particularly for nosocomial infections, and address the diagnostic gap, which includes regulations, collaborate with industry, and expand on One Health initiative. And we are trying to create a dedicated National Institute for Zoonosis to look into this. I thank you so much for your attention, and this AMR sincerely remains a huge, big problem, and I congratulate the CDC again for taking up this initiative in a big way, and we have got excellent support pledged by the WHO, and I can pledge support from the Indian Council of Medical Research, representing a large population of the world. Thank you so much for your attention.
India is at the epicenter of the superbug problem. This has happened, one, because of our population density, two, because of the fact that antibiotics are freely available in our society and people take antibiotics without a doctor's prescription.
A deep science-based startup like Bugworks, which is one of the very exciting startups based out of CCAM, require that culture around them to build deep science technologies. So we have now a fantastic pool of startups, which gives us a hope that we will have innovations in India, looking at Indian problems, the problems which are around us, and build solutions for that.
The Indian government is trying to do its best to create awareness, fund amazing incubators that give us access to the latest and greatest equipment and facilities. We can't open the champagne bottle until we have human data that shows that our antibiotics are working in a human setting. But I see new support mechanisms coming in the next few years that's going to make it wonderful for small companies like ours all over the world, not just Bugworks. Small companies doing innovative work because the problem needs to be solved.
I'm sure you'll all be interested to know that that was the world premiere of the Wellcome Trust video on AMR in India. And we're actually just about to hear from the star of the film, Anand Kumar, co-founder and CEO of Bugworks. And the CDC's launch tonight is one of many events happening this year. So the Wellcome Trust is hosting its own call to action event in Ghana in November. And before that, in October, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is hosting its Grand Challenges Conference, which will feature new research on infection and AMR. So there are lots of different events, lots of concerted efforts to raise awareness to this problem. So soon, Anand Kumar will take to the stage. He's CEO of Bugworks, an India-US biotech company, one of only a handful of companies globally working on tackling superbugs, looking at innovations that could be used in hospitals and in the community. The company is designing next-generation antibiotics that can tackle a broad spectrum of superbugs. It's won many international prizes, including the US government-instituted CARB-X grant for antibiotics innovation. So we've seen him on film, now let's see him in the flesh, Mr. Anand Kumar.
Namaste, with love and humility from India. Wonderful to be here, great honor, and I really thank the CDC for giving an opportunity for a small, innovative company from half the world away to present in front of such a wonderful, august audience. The global situation around AMR is stark. We don't need to talk about statistics. You've seen it yourself. And I come from India, where we have such a large disease burden. Of the 700,000 deaths per year, a significant portion happens from India, and about 100,000 babies die every year owing to neonatal sepsis. But I'm not here to talk about a problem from India, but rather from a solution space. The organizers, when I spoke to them, were kind enough to tell me to share my personal story. So it may sound like a Hollywood script, but it's real. And that's what I'd like to share with you guys. I'm a semiconductor physicist, knew nothing about science. I was designing computer chips in Silicon Valley before I went to India. And a personal crisis made me move into biotech. And we started a cancer company called CellWorks, where we were using computer chip design modelings to model the human body for cancer. While we were doing CellWorks, I was fortunate enough to work with the Wellcome Trust to use computer design techniques to simulate tuberculosis. A crazy bunch of guys looked at TB and said, can I use the same mathematical modeling that we use for computer chips, advanced computer chips, to simulate tuberculosis? And we simulated tuberculosis and came up with a new set of combinations for tuberculosis that's going through clinical trials. That was the genesis for Bugworks. And in 2014, we started Bugworks as an Indo-US venture. In 4.5 years, ladies and gentlemen, we believe we are very close to cracking the superbug. And in about a month from now, we'll be announcing a global breakthrough with a clinical candidate that's pretty much working on all of those organisms that you saw right up there. That includes gram-negatives, gram-positive, sexually transmitted diseases, as well as pathogens that impact bioterrorism. We still have a long way to go because we are preclinical, and we hope to enter clinical trials at the end of next year. The inspiration for my work to work in infection came from my father, who was an infection diseases specialist, famous doctor in India, spent 53 years curing people of TB, and he cured the first HIV patient in India in 1982. Unfortunately, he himself succumbed to bloodstream infection a few years ago and passed away. But in his passing away, he actually bolstered confidence in me and bolstered a resolve that I had to use his death as a learning to continue designing novel broad spectrums. Starting a company in India in antibiotics was a crazy idea. The big pharmaceutical companies had walked away. There was no funding dollars. The science is incredibly difficult, yet we thought we'd take it on. And how did we take it on? We took mathematicians, computer scientists, electrical engineers, microbiologists, biophysicists, biochemists together, maybe all blind men and women looking at the elephant, and said, can we look at superbug in a different way? And we started simulating the very innate mechanisms that gives this bacteria that virulence, called efflux pumps. These are pumps that kick out antibiotics. And we were able to simulate those pumps using computer chip design techniques, and were able to design new medicinal chemistry that was able to be invisible to the innate defense mechanism. So you need to enter the bacteria, you need to hit the bacteria at new targets, and you need to be invisible to the pumps inside the bacteria. And that's what we are headed towards. The Indian ecosystem has been a fantastic place to work, great support from the Department of Biotechnology. And, ladies and gentlemen, the pathogens that we see in India are routinely pan-resistant, which means the battleground for us to test our ammunition is much far tougher than even the isolates we get from the CDC. They're pan-resistant, we routinely see colistin resistance, and it really, really challenges us to test our products on these. Antibiotic innovation is a perfect storm. As I said, the economics is simply not there, and you need talent pool from across the world. So we are only 20 people in India, but we work with the global network from the United States, the UK, EU, South Africa, Japan, and India. So it's a completely collaborative global story. The big change in our company happened because of Carbex. Very honored that we were the only company from Asia to be chosen by Carbex. And it's because of Carbex and BARDA and NIAID Services and the Wellcome Trust, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that we were able to progress our products to almost entering humans in the next 1 year. We wanted to give up because we simply couldn't get funding. We pitched to more than 250 presentations over the last 3 years to get funding. And I remember the words of my father before he died when he said, I spent 53 years, I saved 150,000, 200,000 people. But if your team is able to crack the superbug, you can impact millions of lives. And honestly, that was what kept us going. Many of us sold our personal properties to raise money to fund innovation. And we don't say this to get any empathy, but just to tell you that there's this strong resolve to break this problem, come what may. So deeply thankful for all those global networks that made it happen. Without push and pull mechanisms, antibiotics will not happen. We can speak as much as we want, we can write as many reports as we want, but without R&D innovation that pushes innovation and pulls it from the market side, it's going to be very difficult. Thanks to Carbex and Wellcome Trust and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Drive A and B, there's enough push mechanisms. They're funding about 40 companies. We are one of those 40 companies. Hopefully at least 5 of those 40 will cross the line and crack the superbug. And whoever does it, great, it's good for the world. But on the pull side, if there is no market and none of the big pharmaceutical companies participate, it's going to be very difficult. So my hope, our hope, is that by working with platforms like this, we can sensitize governments all over the world to create some pool of money that incentivizes new antibiotics. For a fraction of the cost of a fighter bomber that you spend per year, you can actually fund 20 antibiotics, and 20 antibiotics will buy us 100 years of human history. There is no exaggeration. $4 billion is the cost of one fighter bomber. For $20 billion, we can fund 20 antibiotics, and honestly, that will buy us the next 100 years. And I think we can do it. We are almost there. A great problem to be solved with global collaboration. Once again, thank you very much. And Bugworks is not yet a success story. It will be a success story when no babies in Malawi or India or anywhere in the world die of neonatal sepsis, and no one has to suffer from MRSA or have untreatable urinary tract infection or bloodstream infection. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity, and let's work together. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anand Kumar. It's so amazing to hear that there are solutions on the horizon. So we've now heard from all of our speakers, and I really hope that you've been inspired by the different perspectives that have been shared tonight. What's clear is that we all have a role to play in the fight to tackle AMR. It will take action from world leaders, doctors, farmers, vets, public health organisations, drug companies, and many others. And what I hope you'll take from that is that whatever area you work in, you can do something today. So if you haven't already made a commitment, I hope you'll take a moment and fill out the card in your programme. If you drop it in the bowls in the other room, CDC staff will reach out in the next few weeks and they'll start the dialogue with you about what you can do and how you can help. So I just want to finish by repeating that every single minute somewhere in the world, somebody dies from a resistant infection. So in the last 2 hours since we've been here, more than 100 people have died. That's almost a third of the people in this room. But while the problem is vast, as we've just heard, there's a lot we can do, and there are solutions. And with your action, we can tackle it. So thank you so much for coming here tonight. I hope you found it insightful and inspiring, and I hope you'll get up from your seats and make a pledge immediately. So if you hang around, there'll be food and drink until 9 p.m. As a journalist, I'd love to meet a lot of you, so I do hope you'll stay for a drink. Thank you again, and good night.